I don't think this may be the first time you've ever heard of this, where maybe you have a senior executive team who does say, well, all of our customers are alike, but not all customers are the same. So how do you segment your customers? Who owns that? Oftentimes you'll start to see breakdowns even at that level where somebody on the product engineering side went through agile training and they were told they had to go create personas. But then the problem is that maybe the marketing or the sales team has different personas or different users. And so it's like, I've never seen companies be successful when you build a product for one and then tell marketing, hey, go position it for this other customer. You're probably going to end up in a ring of sadness in some dimension or the other when that happens. When it comes to SaaS pricing, especially, like most executives think that what you charge determines your success. In fact, who and how you charge determines your success. So I would say for most folks, if they're sitting there arguing, should this product be $19 or $99, probably having the conversation on the wrong level. I would spend most of my time on what the price tag goes on and little to barely any time on what number goes on the price tag. It often combines a bunch of different qualitative factors and interrelated choices that we have to make sure that our differentiated value is clear to users and that we get compensated for that value as they receive value as well.
Creating great products isn't just about product managers and their day-to-day interactions with developers. It's about how an organization supports products as a whole, the systems, the processes, and cultures in place that help companies deliver value to their customers. With the help of some boundary-pushing guests and inspiration from your most pressing product questions, we'll dive into this system from every angle and help you think like a great product leader. This is the Product Thinking Podcast. Here's your host, Melissa Perry.
Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Product Thinking Podcast. Our special guest today is Dan Balcauski, the founder of Product Tranquility. Dan is a strategic advisor who specializes in optimizing pricing and packaging for B2B SaaS companies. I'm thrilled to dive into the conversation and explore how we can rethink pricing to drive better product and business outcomes. But before we talk to Dan, it's time for Dear Melissa. This is the segment of the show where you can ask me all of your burning product management questions. Go to dearmelissa.com and let me know what they are. Hey, product people, I have some very exciting news. Our new Mastering Product Strategy course is now live on Product Institute. I've been working on this course for years to help product leaders tackle one of the biggest challenges I see every day, creating product strategies that drive real business results. If you're ready to level up your strategy skills, head over to productinstitute.com and use code LAUNCH for $200 off at checkout. Here's this week's question. Dear Melissa, as the Director of Product and Operations for the e-commerce division of a pharmacy company, I oversee an e-commerce platform integrated with a health tech component. Within our structure, there's also a director managing the commercial strategy, deciding what products we sell and which to prioritize online. Our long-term vision is to evolve into a marketplace where our digital presence offers a broader selection than our physical stores. In this context, how would you define the role and the focus of the product management and operations areas? Specifically, how can we ensure alignment and maximize value within a broader ecosystem that includes both commercial, product, and operations strategies? So I've worked in a lot of e-commerce companies, so I am familiar with this problem. And what you want to do is separate here the e-commerce component from the physical products that you sell, right? We've got our digital products and we've got our physical products here. Now, you are going to be building this e-commerce platform that serves up those physical products, and you want to be able to sell them in the best light. So you do have to be intertwined and understand what the commercial strategy is going to do, what products you're going to offer, why you're offering them, who you really want to target on the platform, who you think will be coming to it, how you attract them. Is there some kind of health tech component you said? Maybe there's a watch that alerts people they need to come to the platform and do something, or you have data that you can back in there where you steer them towards the right products. Not sure. But you want to understand what's the angle of who you're selling to and what those products are. From there, you're going to go back and figure out, how do I make the best digital experience to deliver those products to people and allow them to sell it? So your e-commerce platform might be very simple. You might just say, hey, we don't really have a strategy for getting people in here and taking care of this. It's just an easier way for them to buy than going into the store. All right. So then you're going to make an e-commerce platform and you're going to have your pharmaceuticals on it. You're going to surface those up to people. But you might have a larger strategy here where you're saying, hey, with our health tech component, we might be capturing a lot of data about our customers, and we want to help steer them towards the best solutions. In this case, once you understand that commercial strategy and what those products are there for and why we're doing an e-commerce platform, right? What's the reason behind it to sell more? Then you might be able to do more digital strategies that help get people to the right products within that. So that purview right there around the digital stuff is really the product management that we're talking about. That is the digital product management. So you're in charge of that platform, the user experience on that platform, understanding what types of products are going to go into it so that you can make it easy for them to get uploaded into the platform and to be sold. So that is one purview. Another purview is going to be selecting those physical products. So going out, sourcing them, doing all of that, that's somebody else's purview. So two distinct things. Then you probably have the operations about actually getting those products shipped, let's say, to the customer. That's another platform, right? That's probably going to go a little bit hand in hand or plug into your e-commerce platform. So those three things are pretty distinct. But the idea here is that we have to start from, why are we actually building this platform? What do we think it will do for the business? Do we want to be innovative here, or are we just doing something to offer more solutions than just going into our stores? What do we want to do? What could we do? That could be a great place for you to paint a vision. And then you want to understand from the commercial strategy, what types of products are we sourcing and who are we targeting so that you can build the best platform possible. I'm sure there's going to be a lot of build versus buy decisions in here too. Don't try to recreate the wheel if you don't have to, but think about where you can be innovative, right? Where can we offer the best solutions, and where should we integrate or partner with other people to provide those digital solutions there too? So that gives you an edge so that you can focus on the most innovative pieces of it and then bring those digital products to life. So I hope that helps. And I hope that clears up the distinction between all of your different lines. You're always going to have to work together and make sure that goes smooth and your strategies are aligned, but they are owned in separate areas. I wish you the best of luck with your pharmaceutical products and expanding your e-commerce company. Now, let's go talk to Dan. Welcome to the podcast, Dan.
Good to be here, Melissa. I'm excited for our conversation. Thank you for having me.
Me too. It's always a good day when you can talk about pricing. So I'm curious for you, how a lot of people don't know much about pricing. Looks like a weird way to get into it from a product background. What led you into the pricing world?
Yeah, I think by happy accident and opportunity, like all good careers, that's how they're built. I spent 20 years of my career in software, started as a builder, as an engineer, moving into engineering management, and then into product. And early on, I noticed something fascinating, which was most tech companies obsess over building fancy products and acquiring customers, but ultimately neglect a lot of how they capture value. And that ultimately hit me when I became responsible for product roadmaps and saw firsthand how these pricing decisions were rushed afterthoughts, despite what is on its face significant impact on company success. And today I help B2B SaaS CEOs define pricing and packaging for new and existing products and help them transform their pricing practices from confusing liability to a competitive advantage.
Awesome. And when you were first getting into the pricing world, what were some of the biggest misconceptions about pricing in general that you saw?
Yeah, I think the first most prominent one is treating pricing as simply putting a number on a price tag. Like when it comes to SaaS pricing, especially, like most executives think that what you charge determines your success. In fact, who and how you charge determines your success. So I would say for most folks, if they're sitting there arguing, should this product be $19 or $99, or should our price it end in fives or nines, you're probably having the conversation on the wrong level. I would spend most of my time on what the price tag goes on and little to barely any time on what number goes on the price tag, because price is really just barely ever one number, one decision. It often combines a bunch of different qualitative factors and interrelated choices that we have to make sure that our differentiated value is clear to users and that we get compensated for that value as they receive value as well.
How do you see, you just mentioned a little bit, like who do you sell it to? What are you actually selling? How do those factors actually play into pricing?
Yeah, I've noticed a lot of fundamental strategic problems. Like it's very easy for, and if anyone's ever been on this outside of executives getting done with their quarterly business offsite or yearly offsite, and they deliver their OKRs masquerading as strategy, you realize that you can make those things sound good, but pricing and packaging is really where, I said this to people before, where you dig up the skeletons in the closet of bad strategy. So what you run into immediately, having done this a bunch of times, is I kept on seeing the same problems. Like ultimately customers, when they would try to price and package their software, they face these four big problems. They didn't really know who their customers are. They didn't really understand how their product helps customers. They can't explain why their product is special. And they forget that pricing is more than just picking a number. And so I seeing these problems enough, I ended up creating a model that I call the services model. So services stands for the four, it's an acronym, of course, like all things have to be in marketing, SVC and S. So those letters stand for segments, value, competition, and strategy. So quickly, let's break it down. So S is for segments. So who are your customers? How are they different from each other? What do they need? V is value, like how does your product actually help customers? Why is it important to them? C is competition or competitive alternatives, like what other choices do customers have? And then these first three elements I really think of as like inputs to the overall pricing process, because your pricing power comes from the differentiated value you create for a particular segment beyond the competitive alternatives that are available. So then those three elements filter down into the final piece, S, which is strategy. So how will you sell your product to the right customers? Like in strategy, I really use the Michael Porter sense of the word, where it's about trade-offs. Like we can't be everything to everyone. We have to make choices about where we want to focus, which customers do we want to go after, how will we show them our product is the best choice, and then how will we ultimately package and price our product to make it easy for them to buy and then scale with the value they receive. So putting all those things together, it's very easy when you go into, again, unarticulated strategy, where you start trying to realize very quickly that, unless we can have a common language about which customer we're going after, we really can't make appropriate decisions, because you're going to find as you get into the nuance of these interrelated packaging decisions, this choice of, for example, a pricing metric, should it be per user or per API call or per gigabyte of data store, is going to work for a certain set of customers, and it's not going to work for this other set of customers. Making sure that you've articulated those things up front is incredibly important.
Yeah, I find that a lot of organizations do not know their segmentation on the customers. Whenever I come in for product strategy, that seems to be one of the biggest things. We might know the markets, but we haven't really segmented out the customers. When you're working with people to do pricing strategies and start to build this out, do you typically start there? And how do you deeply understand what those customer segments are?
Yeah, I think there's a sub problem there, which is segmentation is like MVP or product market fit. It's one of these really abused terms in the marketing world where everyone thinks they know what it means, but we all talk past each other. And I think one of the first kind of mistakes, especially as it applies to a pricing project or initiative, is that people have a very difficult time in thinking past like things like firmographics being the equivalent of demographics in B2C, the size of the company by revenue or number of employees, or the industry vertical it's in, or the geographic location of the headquarters, for example, or how many branches it has. Those things may be relevant, but they're often not why people buy. Like, you're a Fortune 500 CMO. You do not roll out of bed in the morning and be like, I am going to buy MarTech software because I am a Fortune 500 CMO. Like, you've got some situation, some problem that is causing you to lose sleep, to be like, oh my God, I got to fix this. Yeah, it may be related to the size of your organization, but it's probably related to a bunch of other contextual factors. And we really want to dive deep into what those contextual factors are. So I'll always start like a multi-step process when I talk about people like segmentation, because I think like you could end up in a business. I don't think this may be the first time you've ever heard of this, where maybe you have a senior executive team who does say all of our customers are alike. And in that case, maybe for your audience, I might recommend they start searching for another job, because that's going to be a very difficult place to try to make an impact as a product leader. But I would start with, okay, like we realize that not all customers are not the same. So how do you segment your customers? Is that widely shared? Who owns that? Oftentimes you'll start to see breakdowns even at that level, where somebody on the product engineering side went through agile training and they were told they had to go create personas. So they went off in a room and created the Sally SMB and Molly mid-market and whatever, but it wasn't based on any research, or maybe it was based on some research. But then the problem is that maybe the marketing or the sales team has different personas or different users. And so it's like, I've never seen companies be successful when you build a product for one and then tell marketing, hey, go position it for this other customer. You're probably going to end up in a ring of sadness in some dimension or the other when that happens. So just even starting with, okay, do we have a segmentation? What are those factors based on? Is it shared? And from there, you'd be like, okay, are these the factors that we've split these groups? Are these what help them make decisions between what they buy? And I'm a big believer in things like jobs to be done. I know you've had a lot of the greats, even on this podcast, a big fan of like folks like Bob Besta and Tony Ulwick, who have written extensively about this. And I really like Tony's breakdown, because it really helps you understand very clearly, okay, we have this user in a particular context. They're trying to achieve some functional outcome. How are we going to measure that functional outcome? And then we can look at different customers and ask them what the problems are that they're trying to solve, what's most important metric for them to affect. And then based upon that, they will have a different perception of the value we bring. And that's how we really want to think about segmenting these customer groups.
Wow, that's awesome. So when we segment those groups and look at it, you also mentioned this is kind of like the who, you mentioned the how do we charge? What's the difference? What are the different ways of like how we charge? What should we be thinking about there?
Yeah. So as I mentioned, the price isn't just the number on the price tag. For all of the non-pricing people out there, you have my greatest sympathy, and I apologize for everyone in the pricing world who has not created a common language around this. I try to be consistent, but it's very difficult as you're trying to get your groundings, especially when we're talking about B2B SaaS. This concept of packaging, I think of as 4 separate elements. I'll break them down quickly. So price metric, price model, offer configurations or bundles, and then price fences. Now, let's use our favorite fast food restaurant, McDonald's, as an example. I go to McDonald's, I order a hamburger, I pay money for that hamburger. The price metric there is a price per hamburger. So that's what I'm paying per transaction value, right? That is the thing. If I buy 10 hamburgers, I pay 10 times as much. And so that is the price metric. And we have this all over at B2B software with per API, per user, per gigabyte of data transferred or stored, in any number of different elements. Your pricing model, I go and I buy that hamburger. I pay my money. I get that hamburger. I have the rights to do with whatever that hamburger is forever. That is a perpetual transaction. So price model defines how and when money flows through the system. And so we also have things like in B2B SaaS, subscription or pay as you go. So now price metric, price model. Next is offer configurations or bundles. I'm back in the McDonald's drive-through. Maybe I don't just want the hamburger, but I want the fries and the Coke. McDonald's understands this. They've created the value meal or the happy meal for the children. So these are ways that we take individual product capabilities or features and group them together in ways that make it easier for customers to buy more from us to solve whatever problem is that they need based upon our understanding of the market and their value. And so obviously most B2B SaaS companies will have something like good, better, best. That's one architecture among many. There are other choices as well, but about 75% of B2B SaaS companies have something like good, better, best model. And then finally would be things like a price fence. The price fence is something that you don't probably think about a lot, but you do see pretty often in the B2C world. So price fence is how do we make different customers pay different prices for the same product? You might be like, that doesn't make any sense. But if you've ever taken public transportation, you give your money to the bus driver, senior citizen gets on behind you, they show their senior citizen card, get a discount. The student shows their ID, get a discount. If you've ever attended the Friday matinee showing at a movie theater, you've seen a time-based price fence where you're going to pay different price at seeing the movie at noon versus if you go at 6 o'clock because everyone else wants to go at 6 o'clock. And so we have these as well in the B2B software world where potentially we have different discounts. When the Russian war in Ukraine broke out, I know a lot of people gave like 100% equivalent discounts to companies that were based in Ukraine, for example. So there'd be like an ID based discount, or maybe there's ones for like nonprofits, et cetera. So thinking through those elements tend to be much more important than the focus on the number. Of course, once we figure out all those elements, we have to put a number on it. We could get the number entirely wrong. As long as we get those other things right, we're going to be much more set up for success.
Awesome. And when you think about rolling this out inside of organizations too, you mentioned your services model a little bit. We were looking at the customer part, those things. How does that all come into play to develop these different pieces?
So are you talking about we have the strategy developed and now we're trying to have it actually in the market? Is that the part you're curious about?
I guess, how do they use that services model to break down each one of these individual pieces, and who should be involved in that too?
Yeah. Let me take the second part and then I'll take the first part second. So in terms of who should be involved, I think one of the big mistakes I see a lot of companies make is that they haven't defined who actually owns any of this. And so that's a big recipe for success, because if we go back in time, there was a time when there wasn't product management. And there's a reason that product management as a function exists, because there's a lot of really difficult, ambiguous decisions that are important, that are going to affect every single stakeholder in the business, that we need somebody to drive forward and have ownership with. Not that person gets to be a dictator or tyrant and do whatever they want. They have to be able to listen to all the stakeholders, including the stakeholders not in the room, most often the customer, and then be able to make the decision in the best interest of the business. We have a very similar problem with pricing. So my general recommendation is that product marketing is well suited to own pricing and packaging, because they usually are the caretakers or owners of positioning, and pricing and packaging and positioning are directly related. I believe your pricing and packaging is a function of positioning. I believe product can own it. The problem is product often has so much else on their plate that in order to rigorously own it, it's like asking the CEO to own it. It's like they should be heavily involved and they should be consulted and maybe even have veto authority on the decision, but they've just got so much else that they probably just don't have that bandwidth. So that's the main problem with having product management own it. But product marketing, they're in a strategic position in the organization. They understand the value messaging. They understand the competitive environment. They've got the long-term view. But at the same time, you do need to bring in, much as you would in product management, other stakeholders. So sales is going to be a very important stakeholder. Finance is going to be an important stakeholder. Obviously, the CEO, every member of the executive team actually is going to have a personal view on what the answer should be. So you're going to face a lot of the similar challenges that a product manager will trying to make those decisions. So that's on who should own it. I generally do not believe that sales should own it. You've got a bad mix of incentives there. It's like putting Dracula in charge of the blood bank. I just don't think it's a good decision. And I find that although it might make sense intellectually to say this involves numbers, let's put finance in charge of it, they're too far removed generally from the customer and the value to, I think, really do the job. You do want them as a stakeholder. They have to understand. You may even want some of their help in being able to model revenues and cash flows and churn, et cetera. Having a good FP&A counterpart is important, but just having them own it outright is a little bit too removed from the value side of the equation that we talked about earlier. So how do you use that services model? So again, starting with understanding the segments, if we've gone through the exercise of, okay, now we have a sense of these 3 to 5 different customer groups we may go after. Do we understand the context that they're in? How do they get value? Because one of the first decisions we're going to want to make is around the pricing metric. It's one of the most critical decisions. If anyone is out there and they're trying to do something with pricing, it's probably one of the highest leverage tasks that you can do. I would say that between that and offer configurations, but if I had to rank them, I'd put pricing metric first. So when we look at the pricing metric, we want to look at, for these customers, does this metric scale with 3 things like value, with cost, and is it understood and able to control by both sides of the transaction? Cost is important because we want to make sure that you don't want to be selling $20 bills for $10. That's not a good idea. You're not going to be in business very long. And then perceived value. And that's really where having that underpinning of the different customer segments and the context that they're in, this is really where that rubber meets the road, because what you'll discover in that discussion, if you haven't done the segmentation work up front, inevitably what will happen is you'll get to the end of this process. You'll say, hey, here's our new pricing and packaging. And somebody will put their hand up and say, but what about customer X? What about customer Y? It won't work for them. And so we want to be looking through the lens of these different packaging decisions through like a rank ordering of saying price metric A works for customers, is like the best for customer segments 1 and 2, but 3 and 4 are going to hate it because the way they use or get value from the product is going to be different. And they would prefer customer 2. And this is really where then that strategy element comes in and be like, okay. And also the competition, like, is there a market standard? For example, if you're in the CRM space, the standard is price per user. So you're going to be wanting to look at that, or there could be options where it's, yeah, we want to make a sharp turn from that because we believe it'll have some competitive advantage. But then also, what does that mean? We mean, because we're going to go after, I've actually been involved in conversations like this with clients where, for example, I had a customer, they were building CRMs for nonprofits, and they're like, because nonprofits don't have the sort of standard revenue incentive that follows the logic for a per user model, the way CRMs are priced for that market doesn't make as much sense. And so we're going to explicitly make a left turn and go with a different direction for that market. Yeah. Thinking through those decisions with the underlying basis of having understood what your customer segments, how they differ in the context that they're in, is important for being able to think through those individual decisions rigorously. And the process continues to go, but I'll stop there.
The pricing metric is really interesting to me. When you were looking at defining like a great pricing metric and honing in on what's going to make or break this, because I've seen this too, make or break a company. If you price something completely wrong, it'd be a great product, but then nobody's going to adopt it. When you think about like settling on that pricing metric, how do you also think about scale? For example, if you're doing per seats and then you're thinking about selling into like the enterprise and you're going for 10,000 people, 20,000 people, what are the different considerations that you think about there?
Yeah. So there's so many different considerations when it comes to enterprise. I would say 2 things that really trip people up when thinking about selling an enterprise. The first is a lot of the work in pricing. We had this drilled into us from an early age of dealing with the normal distribution or the Gaussian distribution averages, means, standard deviations. This will cause you a lot of pain if you continue to think in that mindset as you go into enterprise. Outliers are really going to throw things off when it comes to things like price metrics, things like willingness to pay. Why is that? For example, let's just say you price per user, it's $20 per user, and you're like, okay, we're creating an enterprise platform. What would be a good price? Let's say it's $50 per user. For an enterprise, it could easily be 10x what that first tier is, right? And they wouldn't even bat an eye. They'd just be like, oh yeah, $200 a user, not a problem. Similarly with price metrics, where we run into maybe your standard customer has, say on average, 50 seats or 50 users, but then you come across JP Morgan or somebody and they're like, oh yeah, no, we've got 50,000 users. So it's not even like an order of magnitude, it's multiple orders of magnitude bigger. And one is knowing that going in. And then two is planning for that in terms of there's a bunch of different sort of sub decisions that go in here, but how do we think about the structure of our tiers to accommodate that? Meaning instead of just blocks of 1 to 10 users, 11 to 20, I have to instead think of 1 to 50, 50 to 500, 500 to 5,000, because I need to be able to accommodate those much higher ranges than I was expecting to. And this is the type of thing that if you're doing this well, I always suggest like testing and iteration. It's difficult to know these things a priori without going into the market first. You can do as much research as you want, but something that you're going to learn along the way. I would think the other thing that kind of surprises folks is this pertains more to the price model aspect, which is as you're selling to enterprise, the big news over the last, I would say 3 years in the pricing world has been, oh, everyone's going to usage-based pricing. Usage-based pricing is a big thing. I hate the term usage-based pricing because I think people, when they say that, you don't know if they're talking about price model. Do they mean any pricing that is not seat-based? Is that usage-based? Because I could have a subscription based upon number of devices I'm monitoring or number of documents I'm signing. So that'd be a change in the pricing metric. Or do they mean like this pay-as-you-go model? Or are they talking about both? So that's why I like to separate those things out. But one of the big things that people have always talked about is with the usage-based models, it allows so much flexibility. And if we think about, one of the big advantages is like it's a risk shift between the vendor and the buyer in that, hey, you don't need to make this large commitment because you don't know how fast you're going to roll this out in your organization or how much you're going to use. And so we'll only charge you for what you use. So what does that do? That moves a lot of cash upfront in the sale of a commit on a subscription to, hey, just pay us and we'll bill you in arrears for whatever you use, like it's a utility billing model, like your electricity or your gas line you might have billed at the end of the month. But the problem is you get into enterprise and that ends up working against you because oftentimes predictability and transparency are often valued more than flexibility. And so you have these large enterprise buying cycles where they may have a defined budget. And maybe you're selling sales software to the CRO as your primary buyer, and they've got to go make a pitch to the CEO and the CFO. Hey, we need $50,000 for this software. Okay, yeah, it's approved. You go through this whole thing. That CRO, the CEO, and the CFO do not want to have a conversation 6 months later that says, oh, actually, we were using way more than we expected. It's now going to be $150,000. You're going to have a bad time because their budgets aren't going to be flexible to that extent. And so you may want to consider that depending upon if enterprise is your goal, like that can be a thing that is going to work against you.
It's good to know. Yeah, I think that's great for people out there thinking about and going up market like that too. When you were talking about the usage-based stuff, it started making me think about AI and all the pricing considerations that are going into that. So I see so many B2B software companies out there now. They want to add an AI component. They want the LLMs. They're getting everything ready. What do you have to take into account when you start pricing stuff in with AI components?
So one thing that we didn't really touch on before is all of these initiatives, these need to start with what's our goal? What are we trying to do here? Are we trying to accelerate ARR growth? Are we trying to improve customer lifetime value? Are we trying to increase net revenue retention? So you might have a blend of rule of 40 or so your P&L metrics or your unit economic metrics. But what are we trying to do? Because right now, I think there's a lot of companies that they're adding AI because they were told to, or it's the thing they're supposed to do, or their board's demanding that they have an AI strategy. But the goals are not really clear. And so you may end up with entirely different approaches depending upon what your goal is. And so just to simplify that, are you trying to get maximum adoption? Are you trying to maximize monetization? Are you trying to do a little bit of both? And I think you could end up in very different positions depending upon what your goals are. First of all, taking even one step back, let us not make the mistake that our brethren in the Web3 crypto world made by talking about AI to our customers, because our customers don't care. AI is an enabling technology. It is not a solution to any problem that a customer cares about, as well as the fact that every software vendor says we have AI. So it's simultaneously everywhere and become meaningless, and it didn't mean anything in the first place, so you're not differentiated. So it just works against you on all levels. So then the question is, again, what problem are we solving, and how do we make that available to our customers so that we can improve their perceived value in line with our medium and long-term goals? I think as we get into the goal conversation, I think we're in a weird place right now where there's a lot of weirdness going on, especially when it comes to AI. Especially B2B software companies have gotten away for a long time without having to really understand foundational business logic. COGS are effectively free. And then on a P&L, if you look at publicly traded B2B software companies, it's not zero, but you're blending in a lot of fixed costs that, are not the true incremental cost of a user, because storage, compute, network, AWS or Azure is effectively costless. But now you have this pretty significant variable cost coming in as we're AI application integrators, keeping aside the foundation model providers, OpenAI, Anthropic, Google, are now have a significant variable cost going out the door. And so I think for any conversation about pricing and packaging, there's always going to be a blend of inputs of customer value, competitive pressure, and cost. And so what's happening there is that I think the value part of that equation is uncertain. We're hoping the customers see the value in the thing we bought, but that variable cost is very apparent. And the CFO is very aware of how much of a bill they're getting from OpenAI or Anthropic every month. And so I think people are under a lot of pressure to do margin maintenance. So I think it's imperative on strategic product leaders in coordination with their chief executives to really help understand, are we making an investment right now with the understanding that we don't know if this thing actually is going to create value, but once we have those signals, then we'll price according to that value, versus this other knee-jerk response, which I think is really mistaken. People exposing their cost model to their customers. I call it, don't show your customers your underpants, because customers do not care about your costs. Knee-jerk reaction that I've seen a lot of companies do, and I just think it's really not appropriate, is trying to, hey, we have this per user model, but now we also have this per token, either quota or hybrid model we're going to lay on. And now you've made all your customers have to understand what a token is. And they don't want, like, I'm super technical, and even I, like, my eyes glaze over when I start talking about what a token is. So of course, like, even if your sales folks are super talented and they can get the prospect's head nodding on the other end of the line as they explain it to them, that person's going to hang up, and 5 minutes later to be a guy, I totally forgot. I don't understand what that is. So it's just going to add a bunch of sand in the gears of your go-to-market motion. So you want to avoid that. What can we do instead? So I've seen probably two different foundational approaches that I think are really working well for companies. So the first is using these new capabilities as upgrade incentives. So much like you would come out with shiny new features, XYZ, you may, just a good general practice I would give folks is, like, when you do that, put them in your highest tier first as a general rule, unless you're having some really weird competitive pressure that's forcing you to do some catch up and put it in your lower tier. But having that waterfall from high to low is generally a good way to do it. So folks are putting those in their highest tier in order to increase tier upgrades. So that's a really good way to do it. The other is, and that really works well if you are enhancing existing value drivers. What do I mean by that? So I've been using the CRM space. So I'll say in CRM space for this example. Pipedrive is a popular CRM provider. They introduced some AI capabilities, and they put it into, I think they have 5 packages. They put it into the top 2 packages in order to increase the upgrade. Those capabilities, again, they're AI enabled, but what they really are is, I'm helping the existing sales rep do their job better, faster, more effectively. So Intercom has the same idea with adding capabilities to their higher tier packages to make the support rep more efficient. So you might think about, summarize all the interactions in this account of all the support tickets. There's nothing worse than, you've probably had this experience, everyone has, where you call a company, been a customer for years, and it feels like the first time they've ever talked to you. But you're like, I've been a customer for 10 years. I do user research interviews with your product managers. Come on. So helping that support rep give a better customer experience, versus with the Fin AI agent, what they've done is saying, hey, if our agent resolves a ticket without any human involved, we'll just charge you per completed resolution for that. And so that's a net new value driver that they're pricing separately from their per user. So I think those are two really clear ways that folks are integrating AI in a way that there's no explanation of tokens in there, right? Or if there is, it's like way buried in the fine print. We're not trying to push that to the very front of the marketing, pricing, and packaging page.
Very cool. I like the idea of putting it into tiers too and baking it in. But I do see that really wonky one where people are like, we're just going to charge you per thing or per whatever you use after a certain amount. And I don't know how much I'm using right now. Why would you just add like a variable cost on top of my subscription?
Yeah. And this is a general principle, is that it's usually a bad sign if your pricing metric is something that your customer isn't already counting. The reason why CRM users works really well is because you're talking to a director of sales, VP of sales, CRO. You'd be like, how many salespeople do you have? And I'm sure they could answer that question in their sleep. If you have to ask them, how many custom reports do your companies make per month? They're going to be like, I don't know. We might have that somewhere if we track it at all. And all of a sudden now you're having this really wonky conversation. And it's even worse when you start talking about tokens, right? It'd be like pricing you based upon how many AWS EC2 instances my server uses on the back end of my SaaS software. And all of a sudden you're in infrastructure land, completely far removed from the problem that your customer is coming you for. We talked about a lot of things here, but your pricing and packaging really has an opportunity to help you convey the value that you provide. It aligns with the problem the customer is trying to solve. If you or your sales folks have to take this hard right turn to explain some obscure architectural detail in order to describe your pricing, you've completely shifted from your customer's frame and the value that they're trying to achieve into implementation details that they should have no reason to care about and don't care about.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. When you're thinking about the landscape of B2B pricing, what have you been seeing as some major changes that are happening?
We've been going through this transformation from perpetual into SaaS. And this was Mark Benioff and the Salesforce's contribution to the world 20 years ago now, where subscription has pretty much taken over. Very few companies are launching perpetual products. And obviously that was a technology shift as we move things from on-premise into the cloud, as well as a business model shift. There's been a lot of conversation around what I mentioned before, usage-based pricing. It has pros and cons. I think folks have realized it's not the panacea that it's painted as. It can work very well in certain situations and doesn't work very well in others, depending upon your specific use case and need. I think that's something that has really made that more tenable for companies, I would say, even in the last couple of years than previous. Was one thing we really haven't touched on at all is the operational overhead that is required for a lot of these models. One of the ways to think about it is customer success as a role didn't exist in the perpetual software world because you got 90% of your customer lifetime value in that transaction. So the sales guy's favorite customer was the next one, because I don't care if that customer ever installs the software I just sold them, let alone is successful with it. But when it came to a subscription model, we had to, because we needed that customer to stick around and renew. And so customer success as a role evolved. And we can look at the same thing like revenue operations, DevOps, like all of these roles happened because of that business model change. We've also, as we've moved to usage-based, folks have realized that in order to effectively keep customers informed of what they're using, make sure their bills are correct. You will never hear from a customer for years. You make one mistake on their bill, you will hear from them within an instant. So you want to make sure that those things are correct. And there wasn't commercial off the shelf products that are available. And now there's all the billing system providers, ChargeBee and Maxio, et cetera, have made, and there's others have popped up just for that, have made really good gains in helping that. So that's something I've been keeping my eye on. Obviously, you can't throw a stick these days without hearing people talking about either AI, or I guess the buzzword of 2025 is agents. So I am skeptical we will see actual working agents. I started as an engineer. We used to have agents 20 years ago. So I think we're just recycling everything old is new again. But could we get, I think OpenAI was talking in the last several weeks about $20,000 PhD level equivalent, $20,000 per month PhD level equivalent AI agent that could do work on your behalf. I'll believe it when I see it. So I think we could talk about what that would entail. I think it may be too soon. We're still a little bit ahead of the hype cycle versus reality on seeing those. But I think there's a lot of good work being done, like I said, on the operational side to make usage-based available, as well as the changes to AI that have been happening.
Nice. One of the biggest trends, I think, in the last couple of years when it comes to pricing and packaging has been very much the like product-led growth model where you get an individual in and then you can expand into the teams. Have you seen that shifting? What's your take on doing that successfully too?
This is one of these other terms that is just morphed. So I spent part of my career at a company called SolarWinds. Before product-led growth was a term, we called it a high volume velocity go-to-market model. And really a lot of the same practices were there. And when you're in those type of models, you do have to make your pricing extremely easy for customers to understand, because we, as a general rule, sales folks were expected to close a deal a day. You did not want sales engineers touching more than 10% of deals. So if you had to get on the phone and explain very complicated either user experience, feature capabilities, or pricing, it was just going to slow down velocity. So we made a lot of energy to make those things easy to find, easy to try, easy to buy, and then easy to renew, and had incredible net revenue and gross revenue retention rates there as well. So I'm not seeing so much new under the sun, as it were, other than I think a lot of companies are now realizing, companies and venture capitalists have realized that there is real money to be made, not just hunting whales in the enterprise, but you can make a very nice scalable business within inside sales model and relatively low ECV. From a price point level, you do need to figure out pricing strategy. People often ask me is, okay, is it better to have high prices or low prices? Is it better to be skimming or penetration, the land expand, or is the Apple model? It matters actually less. Like, all of those can be successful, but what matters is that you commit and you're consistent, because there's so many downstream implications of what that means. If you go to Amazon, frugality is one of their cultural values, because they run a incredibly low margin business. I separate AWS because that's a whole different story, but we're just looking at the e-commerce business, right? Like, it's super low margin, but it's incredibly high volume. And so every dollar they spend everywhere is scrutinized, and just, you're supposed to pinch your pennies, because that is part and parcel. It flows from the business model and pricing all the way into, like, how are they strategically competitive on a cost efficiency basis, versus if you're Apple selling the most expensive personal devices in the world, you can make a little bit different decisions on your cost structure, because you can't just waste money. But so it's important that when you're doing like a product-led growth or high volume velocity model, we would put a ton of energy from a product leadership perspective into the customer onboarding experience, because we could not afford to get a salesperson or sales engineer on a call to help a customer set things up. But there were players in our space that were whale hunting. And I remember they used to annoy us because they would go talk to Gartner Forrester and talk about all the new features they're shipping. But like, then we talk to those customers, those CTOs, they're like, yeah, they've been in here for 6 months with a 7-figure professional services thing, and we still haven't seen the dashboards they showed us in the demo. But we could never do that. So we had to really spend a huge amount of time optimizing that onboarding flow. And then that entire go-to-market machine was optimized to that. So I think it's really just important to understand that there's no tricks under the sun, but I think where folks get is they try to dabble. And when you dabble and mix these things together is really where you get bit from a strategic perspective.
I think that's great advice for people out there listening to this. And Dan, my final question for you, for those who are maybe going through a pricing project or struggling with pricing, what's some of your biggest takeaways for them?
Yeah. So I'd say, first of all, treat pricing like a process. And what does that mean? That means having some governance. I always think, when I think about governance, the old cartoon with the bill sitting on the steps of Congress, of like how a bill becomes law. Right? It's like, how does a bill become a law? Somebody in the House of Representatives drafts the bill, and then it gets argued, and then they send it to the Senate, right? And they says, so each of those steps, right? There's an object, there's a step-by-step flow, there's an owners for each of those steps. And most folks, I would say most companies, their first mistake is they just don't have a defined process. And so anything else in your business, this is not going to be something you just do once. It's going to be something that continually evolves. If there's anything we've talked about here, it's that your price is really linked to value. Your value, and especially differentiated value, is constantly changing in the market as you're shipping new features. Your competitors are shipping new features. You get new competitors entering, competitors leaving, you get global trade war, whatever it might have you. There's going to be changes. And so you want to have systems in place that allow you to continue to iterate and improve. Product management has come a long way in the last several decades of really professionalizing that. I think if I had to I've mentioned customer success. I think there's probably product management, then customer success. And I think pricing is somewhere just after that in terms of the maturity process. And an owner having a process continuing to improve, chipping away. It doesn't have to be a pricing metric transformation as the first bite, but hey, like we want to do some SKU cleanup. We want to really look at, are we all aligned on the customers we're serving? And I think that besides pricing, I've been in so many product management debates before talking about this stakeholder wants feature A versus this stakeholder wants feature B. And the primary problem is not that one feature is inherently better or worse than the other, but that we're talking about serving different customers. So whether it's pricing or whether it's product, like having a better view of which customers is the company really trying to serve can solve a lot of those concerns. Really looking at those fundamentals to start, and then you'll always get better and improve. And I try to help demystify this for folks. So try to blog on it regularly and always happy to talk to folks about it.
Great. And if people want to reach out to you and learn more about it, where can they go?
Yeah, so I'm happy to connect with folks on LinkedIn, Dan Balcauski. I try to blog on my website, Product Tranquility, every so often, much less as of late, unfortunately. And then I also have a podcast myself called SaaS Scaling Secrets, where I interview scale up B2B SaaS CEOs. So if folks want to hear we go much beyond pricing of different aspects of trying to scale SaaS businesses from 5, 10 past the 20 to 50 million mark. So folks talking about how they've had to change hiring processes, culture, adjusting the remote work, all those things on SaaS Scaling Secrets, wherever podcasts are found.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Dan, for being on the podcast. And thank you to our listeners out there. We'll put all of those links that Dan just mentioned on our show notes at productthinkingpodcast.com. Thanks again for listening. We'll be back next week with another amazing guest. And in the meantime, if you have any questions for me, go to dearmelissa.com and let me know what they are. I answer them every single episode. We'll see you next time.